All right. I hope everything is working now. I have lost my camera. I have lost my audio the first time I did this. So I probably ought to be pretty good and you don't have to look at my ugly mug. Um, I'm sure by now, you've got some more biome information to go through this week. But today I want to, at least in this lecture, I want to concentrate not so much on biomes, but biotic communities. And biotic communities are subsets of a biome. For example, just in Arizona, we have 4 types of desert. Um, so it's how biologists classify things down, and within one of those subsets of deserts, there are animals that are represented by that, and the plants determine which animals are in there. And from a conservation standpoint, each one of them has to be approached differently for several reasons. But the first thing I want to go over, not only with biomes but biotic communities, is there are 2 principal factors that control what plants go where. The first is precipitation, and the second is temperature. For example, you have the saguaro here. It has adapted to live in a desert zone, but it can't handle it if it's too hot. In fact, we have a lower Sonoran desert subset that we don't have them, but we certainly have them in upper Sonoran. Depends on which side of the valley you're on. So they are controlled by temperature. It's usually minimum temperature though. You will not find saguaros any place that has greater than 5 nights freezing. They just don't exist there. All these people move to Vegas. They ask for a saguaro, they take the saguaros over to them, and they die because there's way too many freezing nights in Las Vegas, even though it's a hot desert. So moisture will control what grows where, and the temperature will control. Plants like a spruce fir have adapted to live in cold environments. They can't live in tropic. They won't drown in the tropical forest. There won't be too much moisture. But the tropical plants have evolved to growing in warm temperatures. They don't have any adaptations for growing in the cold temperatures. So those 2 things will control what grows where. So the life zone or biotic community is defined as any assemblage of a plant or animal populations living in a prescribed area or physical habitat, defined by common plants or animals, and limited by common environmental factors, which are generally climate, but can include soil type and aspect. What aspect? This may be the first time you've ever heard this term. Let me go right to it. I screwed everything up. Here is aspect. An aspect is which side of where does the mountain face? Does it face the north, here, or does it face the south, here? A south-facing slope, because the sun rises in the southeast and sets in the southwest, south-facing slopes will get anywhere up to 2 hours more sun than a north-facing slope. So the north-facing slope is cooler. There's less evaporation. The south-facing slope obviously has more evaporation. And these particular pine trees can't survive with 2 hours more light than these. So they only live on the north-facing slopes. So I'm skipping around. Okay, back to biotic communities. And the first work done on biotic communities was actually done right here in Arizona by a man named Seahart Miriam. And he was a naturalist and had spent quite a bit of his youth living in Canada, primarily around the Hudson Bay area. When he took a job with USGS, they moved him to Flagstaff, And being a good naturalist, the first thing he did was climb the San Francisco peaks. So up he went. Well, you can imagine his surprise when he got up to about 11,000, 10,500 feet. He found the exact same plants in the forest where he was from in the Hudson Bay. So up here on the San Francisco peaks, you see a forest type that looks exactly like it does, same plant species, same density of plants that it does at Hudson Bay. Now this is 10,500. Hudson Bay is at sea level. So what gives? Well, we go back to moisture and climate at 10,000 feet on San Francisco peaks, Mount Humphreys. The climate is the same as it is in Hudson Bay. So the plants that are evolved for living in that climate, that temperature, that amount of precipitation, survive there. The same thing with the Canadian, which is also called the mixed conifer forest, which is a whole mixture of pine and fir trees. That's the predominant forest type in Canada. But since on some of our mountains here in Arizona, on our higher elevations, it's cold enough and has enough moisture, those trees that are mostly found in Canada do very well right here in Arizona and outcompete our ponderosa pine, which is the next forest down. Pinyon juniper, woodland, desert grassland, and Miriam went on down into the lowlands and the Sonoran Desert. And what he was able to come up with is these distributions based on plant species that changed, and they changed. Sometimes it was a very minimal change. Sometimes it was very dramatic. There's usually what they call an ecotone, which is an area where it seemed like both of them are surviving, like right here and these things. But then it becomes completely different here than it is here. And that's where he came up with the concept of biotic communities. It's very real. It's something that you can see. Now, what controls moisture? First is latitude. The further north you go, the cooler it will be. And generally, you'll have more moisture. The weatherman comes on and he talks about this thing called dew point. And dew point is the temperature at which moisture condenses. So, if at 20,000 feet, if the temperature is, the dew point is 55, and at 20,000 feet, the temperature is 55, the moisture that's contained in the air, atmosphere, in the clouds, will condense and come down as rain. If it's 35, it'll come down as snow. I hope that makes sense. So in Canada, the Hudsonian plant community occurs at sea level because it's cold. Those plants are evolved for growing in cold climates. Elevation, the higher you go up, the cooler it gets. That's most of us know that. In Arizona, that plant community occurs over 9,000 feet. It doesn't occur at 200 feet like it does in Canada. And again, the aspect can control where plants are in certain communities at certain times. All right, you're going to watch a film, and I'm going to go over some things briefly here, the different communities, but we have the third highest biodiversity in North America. The only reason we aren't first is because we don't have a coast. Texas and California have higher biodiversity than we do. We have an incredible number of plant species, an incredible number of mammal species, an incredible number of birds, incredible number of reptiles. And these are the primary reasons why, because we have so many different plant, or what we call biotic communities. We have two rainy seasons. Many of you noticed that when you were doing your biome on the Sonoran Desert. We have a winter raining season from October through February, and we have a summer raining season, July through September. Within our state, we have dramatic temperature extremes. We can go from 0 to over 120. We have real rainfall extremes. We have areas that get almost 40 inches of rain a year. We have areas that get 2 inches of rain a year. We have a very diverse topography, and I'm going to go over that in just a minute here on why these extremes in elevations and topography help Arizona have so much diversity. We have a lot of diverse soil. We are situated between the temperate and tropical parts of North America, which means in southern Arizona and right here in the Sonoran, we have tropical plants. The saguaro was a tropical plant that evolved into a desert plant. But we have a lot of animal species like javelina that are essentially tropical. Now they're learning to survive in a colder climate here in Arizona, but primarily because of global warming. But we have a lot of tropical animals and plants in Arizona. Now I'll skip over the biogeographic history because I can't do that on an online PowerPoint. That's hard to talk about. Anyway, looking at our topography, our geology, we have 3 geological provinces. One is basin and range, and those of you who know the state know that this is primarily lower elevations except for some high mountains in southeastern Arizona. Then we have the transition zone, which is the area from probably 4 to 6,000 feet leading up to what we call the Mogollon Rim, and above that is the Colorado Plateau. Let me see if I can make this. Here's that Colorado Plateau. Here is the Mogollon Rim. Here is the basin and range. Well, this isn't a topography map. This is a precipitation map. And what you can see is in those high elevation areas, we have more precipitation. Some areas over 36 inches on some of these mountaintops. Along the Mogollon Rim, it's generally 20 to 24 inches. Down here at Yuma, 2 inches. Maybe nothing over 8. Maybe in Phoenix, some years we're average 7 inches of rain a year in Phoenix. So we go from 7 inches to 40 inches of rain. And a lot of that has to do with the topography. Here we look at the topography of Arizona. You can see this is the basin and range. Here's some of those mountain ranges in the southeast like I was talking about. Here's the Mogollon Rim that comes up here. There's more mountains here in that transition zone, that geological province. And then the Colorado Plateau, which is above the Mogollon Rim. You look at the precipitation, obviously the highest amount of green precipitation is right here through those mountains. And we're going to look at why. Part of the reason is, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, is the higher in elevation, the cooler it is, the more likely you hit dew point, the more likely you're going to have precipitation. But that's a little bit too simple. Now, if we look at rainfall and then our biotic communities, we actually have much more than this, but this is kind of a simple map. But you can see we have several different communities, and they match up very much with rainfall. Here is the highest amount of rainfall. Here's the forest. Here are the desert areas. Here are the areas that were lower in elevation. So again, probably easiest to look at on this slide. You can see that in some of these lower basin areas, that's where our deserts are. But anytime you have that real elevation change is when you have higher precipitation, and higher precipitation usually brings in a higher productivity of plants, including trees, and allows them to grow. So our animals then controlled by the plants and their distribution in Arizona. This is an Abert squirrel, beautiful. Some people call them tassel-edged squirrels, nice maroon back. And this is their distribution in Arizona. If you look at that, it almost mirrors that. And this animal is definitely limited by the vegetation. This animal is an obligate, what we call, biologists call an obligate species. It is 100% dependent on ponderosa pine. If there's no ponderosa pine, there's no Abert squirrels. Now, if we look down here, you can see this is a closely related guy. In fact, it's a different subspecies. This one has a black belly and a white tail. This one has a white belly and a gray tail. They're both tassel-eared. And if we go back over here and look at this distribution, we can see that the black-bellied one is found here, and the white-bellied one is found here. Why aren't they found with each other? It's the exact same type of vegetation. It's ponderosa pine here and ponderosa pine there. Yeah, some of you got it already. There's a bit of a ditch in between them. And what has happened is that we talked about geographical isolation and evolution. These guys on the North Rim, they're not coming down across this topography and that fast-moving, freezing cold river to come over here to breed with one of these guys. It's not happening. So they are split. Those alleles, the allele for the black belly is kind of stuck on the North Rim. The allele for the white belly is stuck on the South Rim. And they're not different species. They could easily interbreed, but because they're geographically isolated, then they're not going to make it. So animals, a bird, this is no problem. A lizard, a snake, a mouse, you and I mean, we get in our car, it's going to take 6.5 hours to drive over here, and that's speeding. So we are limited by topography as well. So animals are often limited by topography, and they certainly are, some of them are controlled by vegetation. Now what about this guy? He's just looking at you. He's not controlled by vegetation. He's not controlled by topography. They are everywhere. In biologists, what we call the coyote is a generalist, and we call the Aberts or kaibab squirrels specialists. We'll get into that later when we start talking about niche, but generalists from a conservation standpoint are pretty easy to manage for. They can seem to find everything they need on their own, whereas specialist biologists need to be much more concerned about them because they have a narrower range of things that they depend on, and if those things are gone, they're gone. So this is just to summarize what I said. Now, if we go back here and we look at this and the precipitation and the forest, you notice though there's desert on this side and desert on this side. Under 8 inches right here. Under 8 inches right here. Well, that looks pretty mountainous to me. So what's going on? Well, the easiest way to see it is over in California and the Sierra Nevada. And we've got this moisture-laden air coming off the Pacific Ocean. It is blown over the Sierras, which are 14,000 feet in some areas. They continue to increase in elevation. The air continues to cool. It continues to hit dew point, and everything, all the precip go on this side of the mountain. The east side of the mountains is arid, and as air goes down, it warms until you get to an area like Death Valley where you can get. They had a temperature this year over 130, and some areas haven't gotten rain for 5 years. Well, that's a rain shadow. If we go back here, the air is going over that mountain and then back down. As it goes back down, it warms up. We have under 8 inches of rain here. We have under 8 inches of rain here. This is much higher in elevation than here, but it's on the wrong side of the mountains. So really what's influencing precipitation is the change in elevation. So as air climbs over a mountain, it will cool and dump its precipitation. As it goes back down the downside, it's going to warm up, and you have what biologists or scientists call a rain shadow, which is exactly what we've got right here in Arizona. So this topography then is influencing the precip, obviously, which influences the biotic communities, which influences many species, but not all. Okay, this is a video I put together. I'd really like you to watch it. In fact, you can get 6 extra points on your quiz that goes from this PowerPoint. And this will be a much more fun way of you really looking at the diversity of Arizona. I think you'll enjoy it more than the next 5 minutes, but I feel like I need to go over this. Okay, you have a quiz, and you can answer every question on that 14-point quiz from watching this lecture. So I hope you've been following along. We have 4 desert types, as I mentioned earlier. We have the Sonoran, which is, as you guys know, who did your homework, this is where we live. You can see the Sonoran Desert is pretty large. Covers quite a bit of area of Mexico. We have our Upper Sonoran. So those of you who have saguaros in your area live in the Upper Sonoran. We also have the Lower Sonoran. And remember I mentioned saguaros can't grow everywhere. And when it gets too low in elevation and there's too little rain and not enough topography for those saguaro roots to wrap around the rocks to hold it steady, they don't grow. It's not too cold, it's too dry. We have the Chihuahuan Desert, primarily found in southeastern Arizona. It can be recognized as a lot of grassland, and then a lot of these yuccas called yucca. I don't know the common name. I'm such a geek. It's yucca alata is the scientific name. The Mojave Desert is found in the northwest part of Arizona into Nevada, and most of the desert in California is Mojave. And the Joshua tree is a real indicator of Mojave Desert, like the saguaro is for the Sonoran Desert. But like the Sonoran, there are low areas of the Mojave Desert that have very little vegetation, like our Lower Sonoran. And then we have the Great Basin Desert Scrub, which is essentially a high elevation desert. You can see here into Utah, Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, Oregon, Washington, and it covers quite a bit of area. And it's a cold desert, but a lot of you put in your biome, a desert is an area that gets less than 10 inches of rain a year. A lot of the Great Basin Desert does not get 10 inches of rain a year, and that's why it's classified as a desert. We have 3 types of grasslands, remember that, 3, and we have interior chaparral. We have the semi-desert grassland, which is found in the southeast. We have here is the semi-desert grassland will have a lot of cacti and yucca. In some areas where it's been overgrazed, there'd be a lot of cacti. We have the plains grassland, which is also in southeastern Arizona, but throughout the area right before the Mogollon Rim. These 2 photographs are near the Prescott area, so that's plains grassland. And then as we go further east and up in elevation, grasslands that are greater than 6,000 feet in elevation in Arizona are called alpine grasslands. They can be anything from a mountain meadow to a plains around Springerville, and they could be just the grassland in between these islands of pine. Interior chaparral, the easiest way to describe that to you is if you see a bunch of bushes you want no part of, you don't want to walk through there because you're going to scrape your arms up, and I can assure you will after studying bears and this stuff for 10 years, that is interior chaparral. There's a lot of it in California. Those of you who've driven over to San Diego have seen it. It's very associated with fire. Wildfires just rage through it, and it's actually adaptive for that environment to burn every 10 to 20 years. This is more chaparral here in Arizona. This is below Payson, and then more over in southeastern Arizona. We have 2 lower elevation forests. We have the pinyon juniper and the madrian woodland, which you could also call oak woodland. Pinyon pine or pinyon juniper can be either a low density forest or it can be very high density. We have 3 species. And again, here's more of here's low density where I'm standing, moving into high density, and then here's really high density pinyon juniper right before the red rocks of Sedona. And because it has many oak species in the chaparral, it's really important for wildlife because acorns are pure carbs and animals desperately need carbs to put on fat. The Madryn evergreen forest also has numerous oak species. As a matter of fact, we have up to 8 species of oak that can be found in certain mountain ranges in Arizona, which is certainly good for the wildlife. Some of it might look like this, more of a grassland with oak trees spread out. We call those oak woodlands. But most of what we call Madryn woodland is a mixture of oaks and pines down in southeastern Arizona. This area has the highest diversity of mammals, it's the second highest diversity of mammals in the world in southeastern Arizona. Extremely high diversity of birds, and this is where we get a lot of tropical species. This is an elegant trogon. This is a Rivolis or a magnificent hummingbird, and both of these are primarily tropical species. And the northern range, the northern point of their range is in southeastern Arizona. And just some trivia you can throw out at your next cocktail party. Arizona actually had bird watchers spend more money in southern Arizona than golfers do, and I know that's a shock to a lot of people. You're around Scottsdale or Phoenix, and you just see all these people at the airport with their golf bags. Well, if you go to southern Arizona, you'll see lots of little old ladies and little old men with their binoculars out there birding, and it's a huge business. I've got friends I went to college with making 6 figures guiding people to find birds like those two there. We have 3 high elevation forests: ponderosa pine, spruce fir. This is the Hudsonian. This is Douglas fir, which was also called the Canadian a little bit earlier. This is our primary forest, the ponderosa pine. Primarily very large trees. There's only 1 oak species in ponderosa pine, so many people think the forest is the best biotic community for wildlife. It's not. Actually, the chaparral or Madryn woodland with more oak species have a higher density of wildlife than ponderosa pine. Douglas fir is, if you see aspen, you can bet you're in mixed conifer. There's usually several species of pine trees along with some fir trees and spruce, and then it get quite beautiful. I'm hoping to head up soon to start taking pictures of color in their mountains. And then the spruce fir, which is our highest elevation, that's the Hudsonian forest, which you only find the highest elevation. Quite beautiful. It's where a lot of your Christmas trees come from. And then above timberline, we only have one area in Arizona that's above timberline. You may have heard that, above tree line. You may have heard that expression before. And that's on San Francisco Peaks. And it is what we call a sedge, which is a grass-like plant, but it's not a grass, with wildflowers, and it's somewhat similar to the Arctic tundra, but not quite as diverse. And then the last biotic community I want you to know, because we'll come back to this one, and that's riparian. And the definition of riparian is vegetation associated with a waterway. And it's usually moving water. For example, you can see here, this is along the Oak Creek in Sedona. Here's another area. This is in southeast Arizona on the San Pedro. Here's some areas in a canyon up on the rim. This is a huge mesquite bosque found in not too far from Buckeye. And then this is right in Buckeye as well. This is where I spent years of my life studying doves. But this is riparian as well. Obviously, this has a lot more vegetation than this. But we have 375 bird species that make home in Arizona. And almost 80% of them are dependent upon riparian. And unfortunately, we've lost a minimum of 90% of riparian because we've drained our rivers, we've diverted water, and early explorers cut down all the riparian areas to make farmland and firewood. And we just don't have it. it's gone. Especially when the river's gone, you're not going to bring riparian back. So we call this an endangered biotic community. And that's it. I hope this was nice and sweet and short. Watch that film. I think you'll get a much better appreciation of what Arizona can look like. Better than me rambling. But I wanted to make sure you knew a certain point. I wanted to make sure you know how diverse Arizona was and what causes our diversity. Any questions? Email me. Have a good week. Bye-bye.